Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, the United Nations COP16 Biodiversity Conference gets underway in Colombia, with delegates from over 190 countries discussing biodiversity conservation. Israel has begun bombing Hezbollah's financial arm in Beirut and elsewhere in Lebanon. And leaders of the BRICS members will gather in the Russian city of Kazan for the 16th BRICS Summit. We begin in South America. Colombia is hosting the United Nations COP16 Biodiversity Conference with a packed schedule for the next 12 days in Cali. The summit brings together world leaders, environmental experts and researchers to push for action on biodiversity conservation. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres urged delegations from over 190 countries to make peace with nature and shore up a plan to stop habitat loss, save endangered species and preserve ecosystems. Michelle Beguer reports from Cali.
The Colombian government, as host, is really pushing for this summit to be the most inclusive in its history. Officials from the United Nations say this event will have the highest attendance since these conferences began in 1994. The Colombian government says more than 15,000 people are expected to take part, coming from more than 190 countries. Experts say we are at a critical point where the extinction of species could begin to accelerate at an alarming rate. The culprits are the planet's climate crisis, deforestation, and pollution. COP16 this year hopes to involve many more sectors of society in discussions, such as indigenous groups and other communities that live in biodiversity hotspots. Now, officials and experts hope this will bring about more engagement, which could translate into action. The last summit was held in Canada 2 years ago, and world leaders back then signed a pact called the Kunming-Montreal Agreement to address biodiversity loss and the restoration of ecosystems. Yet the vast majority of the 196 parties who signed that pact have yet to follow through with concrete action plans. So organizers here will be looking for those details to come out. Colombia's President Gustavo Petro attended Sunday's opening ceremony, as did a delegation from China, led by the country's environment minister. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres addressed the gathering by video link. There is a lot of expectation on how every sector of society can participate in conserving our planet's wildlife and plant species, but also on what governments have been doing to be more, as the COP16 slogan says, at peace with nature.
That was Michelle Beguer reporting on the COP16 Biodiversity Conference. In the Middle East, Israel has begun bombing Hezbollah's financial arm as it announced a large number of targets in Beirut and elsewhere. The Israeli military said the move is an attempt to cut off Hezbollah's financial sources and warned residents to stay away from those locations. Jonathan Regev reports from Tel Aviv.
It's another night of a heavy bombardment in Beirut. It began with strikes at around 9:30 p.m. local time. According to Israel, these are strikes which are targeting Hezbollah's economic assets. About 30 minutes prior to the attack, the Israeli IDF spokesperson in the Arabic language issued a statement calling on every Lebanese resident who lives close to a Hezbollah economic asset to leave as soon as possible, to get far from wherever they are from those assets, as Israel is planning to attack them. Some 30 to 40 minutes later, that attack began, focusing mostly on economic assets, and especially in the Dakhia quarter in southern Beirut, known to be the Hezbollah headquarters. That is happening in Lebanon. Israel is taking off layer after layer of Hezbollah's capabilities. It began with a strike on the leadership, the chief Hassan Nasrallah, and many other leaders. Then came strikes on weapons depots. Then came strikes on intelligence compounds. And now these strikes targeting economic assets. Great success in this mission for Israel Yes. Is it able to take away all of Hezbollah's capabilities? Absolutely not, as more than 170 projectiles, missiles and rockets have been fired from Lebanon.
That was Jonathan Regev on new Israeli strikes in Lebanon. On top of the damage to Lebanon's infrastructure, the country has also sustained heavy economic losses in fighting against Israel. Israeli strikes have severely damaged parts of Beirut and its status as an economic hub. Yasser Hakim spoke with businesses on how they are coping.
Lebanon's economy has been on a downward spiral as the war hits major sectors like trade, industry, and tourism.
Tourism and services was affected a lot during the last period because of the wars, and we had a big problem in this sector, and many companies had to shut down, like hotels, like restaurants, like clubs, and even we have rent-a-car companies. These contribute a lot to the GDP of Lebanon. Lebanon today has a GDP of $25 billion, which is down from $55 billion in 2019.
The Israeli offensive has expanded from southern Lebanon to other cities, including the capital Beirut, the country's business hub. A lot of business owners have fled the country with their families, fearing for their lives. But many had opted to stay and tried to adapt their companies to the vast developing situation. Hani Bouhsalli, an importer, tells me his offices and warehouses next to the airport were recently damaged by an Israeli raid targeting a nearby Hezbollah neighborhood.
We have been moving from huge offices to a very, very small place just to accommodate all the people that are there. And this is one of the problems. There are companies who have been smashed out because they are all located in unsafe regions and they have totally closed.
Bouhsalli says he's committed to keeping his business running despite the security risks. Dealing with employees in such critical times has been another challenge for employers, like Asad Saqqal, whose holding group is operating at about 50% capacity.
Impossible to work at full capacity because we cannot force any employee to come to work. And the time there is bombing in lots of areas, streets are not secure. Those employees don't know if they're at work, if they can go back home. Some are not coming, working online from home, and some are coming, and some have left the country.
Saqqal says he's had to seek alternative measures to avoid more losses.
Competitors with the same, let's say, same business, many of them shut down. We are planning immediately a new factory, mainly in the Arab area. It will be opened up in a couple of months. To be always a plan B for our factory in Lebanon. We're building some new network of customers from there.
Moving operations out of the country is not only detrimental to Lebanon's economy, but to its workforce as well.
We know today that more than 200,000 Lebanese labor out of 1 million are not going to work by force. And we have a very big percentage now that will be laid off if the war continues.
A ceasefire can't come soon enough for the stricken nation.
That was Yasser Hakim reporting from Beirut. Turning to Europe, Chinese President Xi Jinping is scheduled to attend the BRICS Summit in Russia starting Tuesday. The event in Kazan is the first major gathering since the group expanded in January. China's foreign ministry says President Xi will have exchanges with global leaders on international affairs, cooperation within BRICS, and the development of the framework. BRICS now represents nearly half of the world's population and a quarter of the global GDP. The Kazan summit will focus on strengthening multilateralism for equitable global development and security. Huang Fei reports on what to expect.
Welcome to Kazan, Russia, a city that shares its name with the iconic family center where couples come to tie the knot. This unique architecture embodies Kazan in Slavic languages, a giant cauldron blending diverse cultures and faiths. It's a fitting backdrop for the BRICS Summit, where leaders from founding nations will welcome 5 new members, alongside over 30 countries interested in joining.
BRICS began with the unification of the largest countries by population and territory located in different parts of the world. This allows for a distinct perspective on global processes, fostering constructive dialogue among nations. Countries seeking their place want to engage in a framework where they're heard and understood.
Leaders are expected to address key global issues, from climate change to food security and tech cooperation. A top priority will be financial reforms, including exploring national digital currencies for investments and the potential for a common BRICS currency.
The summit will also test BRICS Pay, a decentralized payment messaging system like SWIFT. This new tool is aimed at boosting trade cooperation while helping member nations reduce their dependence on Western institutions.
Local businessman Daniel Galulin welcomes the move. He manufactures boilers for Russian energy companies, increasingly sourcing parts from China due to Western sanctions.
As a business person, I faced significant challenges earlier this year. While some issues have been resolved, financial hurdles remain, including extra costs for transferring money to China. I hope BRICS will simplify operations and help balance currency differences, because we are currently very dependent on the dollar and the euro.
There will also be special focus on interactions between China's President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is President Xi's 10th visit to Russia as China's leader.
Russia and China always have something to offer each other, including our mutual cultural enrichments and close economic ties. The two countries support each other in a complex international situation. This trust extends from the highest levels down to the grassroots, as people here in Russia are very interested in what is happening in China.
Beijing remains committed to free trade, strengthening global supply chains, as well as achieving the UN's 2030 climate goals. In the next few days, China will continue to advocate for multilateralism, positioning itself as a stabilizing and positive force in global affairs.
That was Huang Fei on this week's BRICS Summit in Kazan, Russia. Finally, in Africa, health officials in Rwanda have confirmed more than 40 recoveries from the Marburg virus, with no new infections or deaths in the past 6 days. 2 patients were taken off of respirators in what the World Health Organization chief said was major progress in treatment of the Ebola-like disease. Atam Tashobia has more from Kigali.
Since the outbreak was reported on 27th September, 62 cases have been confirmed with 15 deaths and 45 recoveries recorded. 3 patients are still being treated. Cases were first reported in several major hospitals in the capital, Kigali, with many of those infected being healthcare workers. Rwanda's Minister of Health, Dr. Sabensa Zimana, announced a 92% drop in new infections in the 3rd week, signaling the outbreak could soon be under control.
But we start to see a significant trend towards the week 3, where a 50% reduction was observed, which is the best indicator. You can see that an outbreak is dying when you start to see that 50% decline between week 1 and week 2. So we saw that at week 3, which brought a lot of hope that this is going to be contained quickly.
The World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, arrived in Rwanda on Friday, October 18th, to assess the ongoing Marburg response and reaffirm WHO's support. The next day, health authorities announced that 2 Marburg patients had been successfully taken off mechanical ventilation after 10 days of care at the National Marburg Treatment Center in Kigali. Tedros called it a breakthrough that would enhance clinical management guidelines for viral viruses.
2 of the patients we met had experienced all of the symptoms of Marburg, including multiple organ failure, but they were put on life support. They were successfully intubated and extubated and are now recovering. We believe this is the first time patients with Marburg virus have been extubated in Africa.
Data from the Rwanda Health Ministry show that 1,070 doses of vaccine have been administered as of October 19th. The World Health Organization Director General has warned that restricting travel to Rwanda during this period is unnecessary, and he has urged the international community to avoid imposing such measures. Rwanda's health minister revealed during the press conference here that they do not plan to vaccinate or provide antivirals to everyone. These measures are prioritized to those at high risk, including healthcare workers who are exposed to the virus through treatment of patients.
That was Artan Tashobia on a drop in Marburg cases in Rwanda. Now, recapping the headlines, the United Nations COP16 Biodiversity Conference is getting underway in Colombia, with delegates from over 190 countries discussing biodiversity conservation. Israel has begun bombing Hezbollah's financial arm, and leaders of the BRICS members will gather in the Russian city of Kazan this week for the 16th BRICS Summit. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thanks for listening.